it's me again, Sophie from North Bridlington Library. I work for the East Riding of Yorkshire, and we're back with you to talk about some reminiscence and things that you remember from your childhood. So hopefully, if you've been watching our videos so far, we'll have gone round the rooms of the house. So what each room was, your bedroom and your kitchen, and we've already looked at those and discussed those. So today we're going to look at the house as a whole. So when you were growing up, where did you grow up? What was your house like? Where was it? Can you remember where it was that you grew up? Were you always in that house, or did you move from somewhere else? Or did your parents move from somewhere else? I know that my Nana and Grandad, they moved to Driffield, but Nana had moved from Germany and my Grandad had moved from the Isle of Wight, so they hadn't lived in that area before, and both moved in and got married and moved into this house together in Driffield, and that would be where my mum grew up. Now, what was your house like? There's lots of different types of houses. So did you live in a semi-detached house? Maybe it was a farmhouse that you had, so it could have been quite rural. Or did you live in a town? Maybe you lived in a bungalow, or did you have a back-to-back? A lot of people from the mining towns maybe had the back-to-back houses. You could have lived in a flat, or maybe the prefab houses. So after the war, when there was a shortage of the houses, did you ever live in one of the prefabricated houses? I want to show you some examples of the houses that we have here. So here we have a prefab, which I actually think looks quite nice. And here we have some terraced houses and some semi-detached. So if you can see the semi-detached houses there, so there's quite a bit of garden in front of those before it gets onto the road. And then you've got some terraced houses there, and those houses don't have a front garden or a yard at all at the front. They're straight onto the pavement and the road. There's another one here. Now this looks like it has a workshop and possibly a pub on the street. And you've got the lovely old cars there as well. And that's a really wide street. And again, that one has some little gardens in the front. And got a lovely big detached house here. Now this is a rural house. So you have your semi-detached house there. There's some lovely children gathering in front of these houses here. Now this is a village in Bourneville, and this is probably where the people that worked at the Bourneville factory would have lived. And here we have a farmhouse. You can see the lovely big buildings and the farmers, and I think there's some sheepdogs. What utilities did you have in the house? Did you have gas or fire? Did you have the running water in the house, or do you remember using the village pump? So how was your house supplied? So what I'm going to do, and what we will do as well throughout this video, as we've done before, is do some pauses throughout. So I'll do little sections, and then if you want to have a discussion about the things that we've talked about, so right now we will pause it to discuss what type of house you grew up in. And we'll pause that now and then move on shortly. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you've had a discussion about the type of house that you grew up in. So now we're going to have a think about why you lived there. Did you live there because of work? So was it maybe where your dad went to work and that's why you lived where you live? Was it for school because it was in an area where the schools were good or close to the schools? Maybe your family lived there and so you moved to take care of family, or could you have been a military family that would have moved around quite a bit? Maybe you've just always lived there. Maybe that's just where your family lived and where they grew up, and that's where you always lived. Now, if it was for work, say where your dad might have worked, did that have a particular smell or a noise around where you lived? Now before, showed you these houses here. So this is the Bourneville village, so this would have been for the Cadbury factory. I think I might have said the Bourneville factory, but it's for the Cadbury factory. So these houses were built for the factory, and apparently it always smelled of chocolate around there, a really, really strong smell of chocolate. So if I'd have lived there growing up and I smelled chocolate now, it would have reminded me of that place. Maybe you lived near a mill or a tanner which had smells of their own, or where the mines were. Was there a sulphury smell that might have come from the factories? If you lived on a farm or it was rural, was there a particular smell that came from the farm? I always remember, if I can smell cows now or horses now, I love that smell because that reminds me of my auntie and uncle's house from when I grew up. I used to love going over there and playing with the kittens and the cows. So that smell reminds me. Was there a particular sound? Was there industrial sounds nearby, if there was factories or steel works, if you lived near the steel industries? Could you hear a particular horn or a bell that might have gone off when the shifts were changing? So did you know when your dad was going to work or when he was coming home, because you could hear one of these sirens or bells? So is there a certain sound that reminds you of where you grew up? Did you move a lot, or did you always live in that one same place? The house I grew up in, I lived in till I was about 13 or 14, I think, and then I moved quite a bit after that, but I always lived in the same house growing up. If you did move, which place was your favourite and why? And what did you like about it? What were the things that you didn't like about it? And what was your area like that you lived in? Okay, so we're just going to pause this again for a second now, and we'll have a little discussion about the things that we've just talked about. But just quickly, one of the things that I remember about growing up was that we had a really, really good community spirit. It was in a village, and there was a lady there that owned this really big house, and she had a swimming pool, and she used to let all the children in the village go to her swimming pool. So that's another smell for me, actually, is swimming pools. That reminds me of growing up, and it was really nice that she let all the children in the village use her pool. So we'll give this another pause, and if you can think about why you lived where you lived, if there was any smells or sounds from where you lived that reminds you of it, have a little think about that, and we'll just pause it now. Thank you. Hello. So hopefully you've had a discussion then, and so we're back onto the next section. So what was your street like? Did you live on a main street? Did you live in a cul-de-sac? Or maybe in a village? Was there a lane? Did you live on a lane or around a village green or a village square? So what was your actual street like? Did you have a garden at the front or a little yard, or were you straight onto the path? You know, maybe you had the terrace house that was straight onto the path. Did you have a backyard or a back garden as well? Now, I'm asking about your street and what you had at the front because do you remember what you did as children when you played? Did you go around to your friends' houses, or did you all play in the streets? Now, this is one game that would have been played in the streets. Football. So quite often, all the boys and girls would all gather together in the street because there was never much traffic then anyway, if it was a quiet street, and play a game of football. So what did you use for goalposts? Did you put 2 jumpers up? What was it that you used for your goalposts? Most people remember doing that. So I have a picture here. So can you see the children? I hope that car is actually just parked up and they're all playing football in the street, and I can't actually see if they've got goalposts anywhere. And underneath this one, can you see the girl skipping in the street? Also, as well, I noticed on the picture here, the washing lines going from house to house. Does anybody else remember that? So they've got all the washing hung out. So if they were back-to-back houses, or they didn't have a very big backyard or a back garden, did you hang your washing out the front like that? Now, when you were skipping, did you skip on your own or with friends? Did you have skipping songs? Maybe there was one a little bit like this. Does that song bring back any memories for you? Is that something that you would have done in your street with your friends? What are some other songs actually? Do you remember all gathering together and singing Ring a Ring of Roses? We can all sing that together now if you like. I'll have a little sing. So if we remember Ring a Ring of Roses.
Ring a roses, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down.
So do you remember that one? Also you might have played hide and seek. How about a hula hoop? Or did you have the hoop and the stick, or is that too far? Is that an older version? Did you ever play Kirby? Does anybody remember that game? So I think you both stood on opposite sides of the road and you had a ball and you threw it to your friend, but you had to try and hit the curb. Does anybody remember Kirby? So this is quite a good ball. This is a nice bouncy ball. So did you all share those with your friends as well? How about jacks? A game of jacks, or tiddlywinks with your friends, or a really good game of tag. Cat's cradle was another one, with the string in between your fingers, and then your friend would then move the string around as well. So do you remember playing that? Do you remember the feel of the string and remembering what the next move was and where to put your fingers? Maybe you had stilts. I remember stilts from growing up. So what we'll do is pause again very shortly. So if you want to have a think about what your street was like, and could you play in the road, were you able to do that, and what were the games that you played with your friends, or did you have to go around to each other's houses? So we'll have a pause now and let you discuss this. Thank you. Hello. So hopefully then you've just had your last discussion, which was about the street itself. Now, what was your community like? So what were your neighbours like? Where I grew up, in a village, all the neighbours knew each other and everybody helped each other out. It was a really, really nice village. We would all get together when it was Harvest Festival and things like that. And we'd all go around to each other's houses and borrow things as well, or you'd get hand-me-downs and things like that. In fact, one of the things I remember that the whole village did was my aunt and uncle had a farm across the road, but the farms lived in a field further up. And when it was time to bring the cows down, all the neighbours would come out and you'd block your driveway off, and to stop the cows from coming into your garden and up your drive. So we'd all block the driveways off and we'd all help gather the cows and get the cows down the village to the farm. So I remember doing that. The whole village would come together for that. So did you have a good community? Was there a bit of keeping up with the Joneses? Does anyone remember that? Did your neighbours help out? Did you all help each other out? There's always the old saying about being able to borrow a cup of sugar, popping around to your neighbours and asking for a cup of sugar. So did you have that relationship with your neighbours? Do you remember maybe your parents chatting to each other over the wall or from each other's doorsteps? How about things like, so we talked about babysitters, that quite often happened. And the hand-me-downs as well, normally, or if somebody had a baby, if somebody where you lived had a baby, would everyone kind of gather things together that they didn't need anymore? So somebody come down with an old pram with the baby clothes in. So did you have that good community spirit? Did you have aunts and uncles that weren't actually your aunt and uncle? I had quite a few, and I still call them, most of them, aunt and uncle now. Years later. So I had lots of aunts and uncles that weren't. Did anyone in where you lived, did you have a TV? And if not, who had the TV? So I'll just show you this one. Do you remember on special occasions, did everybody go around to one particular house? So was there one neighbour that had a radio or a TV? So you would all pop round there to watch the special occasions. Could it have been the Queen's speech or something like that? So there's an image here of everyone gathering around that telly. And I think in a lot of places, until the time came when everybody had a telly, we would all nip round. And it might have been the same for the phone as well. Was there somebody that had a phone? And so if there was an emergency or you needed a doctor or something, did you all pop round to that house to borrow their phone? So here you've got some neighbours chatting as well, and you've got the pram there, having a little chin-mag or a gossip over the fence. Now the other thing, do you remember your doorsteps? Did you clean your doorsteps? we have here, you might remember these. Can you hear that sound? The old metal buckets. So these were quite often used to clean your front doorstep. Did you do it, or was it your mother's job to get out every morning to make sure that the doorstep was sparkling? Most likely, it could have been with one of these brushes. You hear this? Really, really stiff brush to clean the front doorstep with. And it was normally quite important that everybody kept it all clean. Did you use soap or was it just water? Do you remember the smell of the soap that might have been used? And when did it become your job, if it did? Do you remember getting together and did everybody keep their area of the pavement or the road clean in front of the house? The other thing that might have been used to clean the front doorstep was this stone. So it was a special stone that was used on the doorstep. And the other thing that you might have had near your doorstep was your shoe scraper. So earlier on there would have been shoe scrapers like this, or they could have had the hole in the wall. So the little hole in the wall that had the shoe scraper in, and then later on it probably became the brush type ones. Like the hedgehog type ones to clean your shoes on. Here's an image of a lady cleaning her doorstep. So you can see the metal bucket there. You can't really see on here, but she's got the scrubbing brush. Did your mum have the pinny on? And would she have the headscarf round and the pinny on? And did she chat to the neighbours while she was doing that? So again, we're going to have a little pause. So if you want to talk about the neighbours and what your neighbours were like, did you have that good relationship with the community? Did you have aunts and uncles that weren't yours? And talk about maybe keeping the doorstep clean. So we'll have another pause now and I'll come back to you. Thank you. Okay, so we're back. So hopefully you've had your discussion. Now we've mentioned where you lived, we've mentioned children playing in the streets, and we've mentioned your neighbours. But who else came? Who else came to the streets or the houses? So could you have had lots of deliveries? Maybe you had the milkman. I've got some images here. Do you remember the milkman? Do you remember the sound of the milkman? Now, the van itself might not have made too much noise, maybe it did, but quite often you would hear the rattle of the milk bottles going down the street, so you knew when the milkman was going round. And quite often you would hear the clinkers. He would put his milk bottles on the doorsteps, and it was probably milk bottles that you've then washed and left out for him. So he'd be collecting the old empty milk bottles and putting the fresh milk on. Sometimes I remember having fresh orange juice delivered as a treat. That wasn't very often. And he's actually got cereal in his. Do you remember in winter with the milk bottles, with the frozen tops, and quite often it would freeze and lift out of the milk bottle and the cap would be up on some frozen milk. Or in the summer having to keep the milk bottles covered because the birds would come and peck through to drink the milk and get the cream. Did you have arguments over who got the cream from the top of the milk? That was my favourite bit. I loved that on my cereal. So that's the milkman. How about the coal man? Do you remember the coal man coming to visit? So here's some. Now they may have already taken these from a cart and be carrying them down to the houses where they're delivering. So did you ever have coal delivered? How about, no, not everybody had this, but we had a fish van that used to go round, and I remember the fishman, and my mum would go out and pick the fish that she wanted to buy, and sometimes he had sweets in the back of the van as well, so sometimes we were allowed some sweets. How about the rag and bone man? Now we've got a sound of the rag and bone man, which we'll play for you now. Can you hear the horse's hooves clopping along? Okay. Now you can always contact us here as well if your rag and bone man shouted something in particular, because I actually can't fully make out what he's saying on there. I know that they used to shout rag and bone, but what else did they shout? If you want to let us know, we're at East Riding Libraries, Museums and Archives on Facebook, so maybe you can let us know what your rag and bone men shouted. Did they give you anything in return as well? I've been told that sometimes the rag and bone men, if you gave them a pile of clothes, would give you a balloon in return, or also the donkey stone that we saw earlier to clean the doorstep with. Did the rag and bone man swap some furniture or a pile of clothes for that donkey stone? How about the scrap man? You used to go along shouting, "Any old iron?" Did you have the scrap man that went down your street as well? And the other thing was, these would mainly, the rag and bone man and scrap men, would have horses pulling the carts, and that horse poo was really good manure. So if the horse had gone in the street outside, people used to rush out and gather that up to put on their roses and in their gardens. What happened with the rubbish in your street? So anything that didn't go to the rag and bone men or the scrap man, or wasn't reused in the house. So a lot of stuff was reused. There probably wasn't a lot of rubbish back then, but what happened to the rubbish that was left? Something else that might remind you of your childhood is the ice cream van. Did you have an ice cream van that came round? This is something that you might recognise. Do you remember which song your ice cream van played? Were your parents mean like me that sometimes tell my children, if they want an ice cream, that if you can hear the ice cream siren going off, it means they've run out of ice creams? That's what I tell my children, but not all the time. So were you mean like me? Was there anything else? How about the ashmen that used to come round and collect the ash, which was also very good for gardens? And some people had pop men that came round with pop. And the postman as well, he was somebody that would have come down the street, and you would have had the postman delivering. How about the rent man? Who remembers the rent man? Did you own your house or did you rent it? If you rented it, here's a rent book here. You see the whole thing. Do you remember the rent man coming round? So there's lots of things for us to discuss again. Lots of memories there. So right now we're going to discuss who else came to the street. So did you have the milkman come round, or the coal man, or the rag and bone man? And do you want to just have a little chat about what deliveries or people came to the street? Thank you. Okay, so we're nearly near the end of the video now. You've just had a discussion about the people that came to your street. Now, something that we will do in another video, so if you want to check out the other videos, we are going to talk about things like street parties that may have happened in your street. So this would have happened possibly in the street that you live in, so you can have a discussion about your street parties. So it could have been for jubilees or coronations. People would have decorated the streets. Did you have bunting up? Did you have special teas and buffets? So here's some bunting here, but we will discuss this in another video. So I'm nearly finished with you now, so we'll do a bit of a recap. So if there's anything else that you did want to talk about, we've looked at the house that you grew up in, so your childhood house, why you lived there, what your street was like, what the community was like, and what else happened in your street. So was there deliveries there? What we'd really appreciate is some feedback, or if you want to get in touch with us, let us know what the ice cream van played, or the games that you played in the street maybe. If you want to let us know, you can contact us on Facebook, and as I said, we're at East Riding Libraries, Museums and Archives, so it'd be great to get some feedback, or if there's any memories that you would like to share with us. So if you can keep an eye out for our further videos, I'll leave that with you, and I will see you soon. Thank you.